Hello, guys and oh, wait. Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 20 of our reading of Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous. And of course, we're going to go over the copyright information first. It says that the author gratefully acknowledges the invaluable assistance of Robert Arthur in the preparation of this volume. And this is all the publishing information here. It's published by Dell, and that gives the address. It's copyright 1965. I think that's a 5. And this gives all of the information, copyright information. I won't go over all of it here, but it also has the printings. Anyways, that being said, we are going to also go over the acknowledgments, but not audibly yet. Anyways, in the last one, we started the story here, The Substance of Martyrs, and it is by William Sambrot. And they're talking about a crucifix that apparently has special powers. It has an aura of peace, and they are going to go into the history of that, and that's where we left it off. So we're going to continue from there. Okay, let's go. Excuse me. Okay. We're going to go to the previous paragraph just because it's interesting. They were talking about how nobody ever stole the cross or anything like that. But then no wars had ever really touched this hamlet. No wars, that is, until Hitler proclaimed his right to rule the world. Then war came to this village with a vengeance, and only after it was already lost for Germany and very bad for everyone. With all the strong young men long since gone, killed or captured on the many fronts, there were only the Herrenvolk left to fight. The People's Army, the halt, the misfit, the old, the dregs of humanity, poor fighting material, perhaps, but over them was placed the most brutal and fanatical of Hitler's officers, the dreaded Waffen SS, Hitler's elite killing corps, men sworn to defend the fatherland to the death. I don't know how to say this word. Unter Sturmführer Holder, former assistant commander at the infamous Dachau concentration camp, then already overrun, was given the job of fortifying the village and assuring that the Herrenvolk would, if necessary, fight to the death in its defense. Holder, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, fortified the town, ignoring the protests of the priest and parishioners. He gave orders to use the bell tower of the church as a spotting post for their deadly .88 artillery, which, when the first American light armor approached the town, they were quickly knocked out by a hail of accurate artillery fire. They withdrew, calling on their own artillery for support. There was no choice but to reduce the bell tower to rubble. On a cold February morning, the American units of the 45th whirled through the thin snow in a swift flanking movement, and the town was taken. Most of the Herrenvolk surrendered immediately. Unter Sturmführer Holler was not among them. He'd escaped. The main body of troops moved on, but a few rendezvoused before the church. A young infantry captain, his hands blue with cold, brought the old priest to see then Major Dumfrey. Anguished, obviously in deep distress, the priest requested in a halting whisper that Dumfrey go with him into the ruined church. Dumfrey went into the shattered building, past the broken pews and the smashed windows, over bits of blasted stained glass littering the floor like sharded rainbows. The priest pointed to the wall above the chipped altar. "We have had a cross there for many centuries," he said in a choked voice. "It was gold, pure gold. No one had ever touched it. though the doors were never locked. And when the shelling came, even though everything fell, it was untouched. A miracle, he whispered. It made us humble and sure that God was protecting us. But now his finger trembled. The wall above the altar was intact, but strangely bare-looking. Against the dark smudge of centuries of candle smoke was the pale outline of where the great golden crucifix had hung. The crucifix was gone. Unter Strumferher Holher had taken it, the priest cried brokenly. Holher, Unter Sturmfuhrer, wearing the lapels of the dreaded Schutzstaffen, assistant commander at Dachau, specialist in death, the executioner of hundreds of thousands of Jews, a man with a dossier of crimes equaling in length the appalling list of names of his murdered victims, even then wanted by the Allies for trial and subsequent hanging, even at the moment of his personal Gotter Dummering. Hoher could not resist adding the gold Christ to his already immense pile of loot. We'll get him, the young captain assured the priest. Where can he run now? They got him near Salzburg. Hoher readily admitted taking the crucifix, and when the indignant young captain brusquely ordered him to hand it over, Hoher laughed, ironically saying that he no longer had it, that he'd thrown it away. However, a number of pure gold bars were found in his loot, at least equaling in weight the approximate mass that the melted down Christ would have been. When questioned at length about this gold, Hoher said after some hesitation admitted that the gold bars were indeed the melted down remains of the stolen gold Christ. Fortunately, the exact dimensions of the original Christ had been known, and there were any number of skilled carvers in the village capable of making a mold. When the finished Christ was again ready to be hung for the bishop's blessing, the worshippers more than filled the church. Children in the pews sniffed in the great cold that filled the shattered church. Shuffling and whispering, they stared in awe at the beautiful gleaming crucifix, which hung once again above the chipped altar. The adults knelt silently on the broken floor, enveloped in layers of clothing. Bitter drafts whistled through the empty windows. But it was a church again, their church. Above the altar, that strangely serene, that powerful golden figure enveloped them in a warmth they'd never known before. And, as if to prove that God was indeed among them, there occurred then the first of the miracles attributed to the golden Christ. A child, a victim of the shelling attack, had been brought to the service. The child had been buried alive in the ruins of his blasted home, pinned beneath the bodies of his parents. When they'd dug him out, he had shrieked once. Then it was as though a light had been extinguished within him. His eyes were blank. He became mute and an unresisting, unsmiling creature with no spark of humanity. But in the church, he looked upon the golden Christ. A faint light leaped into his eyes. He stared. His eyes became brighter, and suddenly he screamed a terrible, piercing scream. He began to cry. His tears were real. No, the tears were real, okay. Genuine tears of emotion. He was alive again, a thinking, feeling human soul, in great anguish, but sane. He is a strong young man now, with children of his own, Dumfries finished, as we walked down the worn stone steps and back to the car. His was the first, but there have been similar cures. I don't doubt it, I said. Not anymore. We got into the car, and Dumfries looked reflectively at the people coming and going. But he lied, you know, Dumfries said softly. Unter Sturmführer Hoher, I mean. Lied? In what way? Dumfries brought out his pipe and snuffed it with tobacco. He said slowly, I don't need to tell you to be discreet about this, of course, he sighed. Actually, even before Hoher had captured, I'd already come into possession of the real stolen crucifix. It had been found by one of my team of specialists. He made a wry face. It had been mutilated so badly there was no thought of ever returning it to the church. The arms were twisted and bent, the torso battered, and the crown of thorns tore completely off the head. Hoher had actually thrown away the golden Christ? Yes, after he discovered it wasn't gold at all, Dumfries said. Where the crown of thorns had been torn off showed dull gray. Where the arms had been twisted and bent, ugly black cracks showed through. He shook his head. It was merely heavily gilded lead. But Hoher's gold bars. Can't you guess where the gold came from? Dumfries said. Hoher was one of the butchers of Dachau, stripping the rings from the victims' fingers as they were led wailing into the gas chambers, retching the gold teeth and fillings from their lifeless mouths as they were fed into the furnaces, accumulating his pile of gold, melting it down into bars. From the Jews, I whispered. Yes, from the martyred Jews of Dachau, Dumfries said. Doubtless Hoher considered it a diabolical joke, saying that the gold came from the stolen Christ. But was he so far wrong? He put the little car in gear, and we moved slowly out of the village. The pagan executioner stole from the Christians their Christ of gilded lead, only to replace it with one made of the most precious metal of all, the Substance of Martyrs. And that was The Substance of Martyrs by William Sambrot. We are ready for Don't Look Behind You by Frederic Brown. And let's see how far we have. Okay, 12 minutes. We might be able to... No, I don't think we can read through all this. But okay, let's go. Just sit back and relax now. Try to enjoy this. It's going to be the last story you ever read, or nearly the last. After you finish it, you can sit there and stall a while. You can find excuses to hang around your house or your room or your office, wherever you're heading, wherever you're reading this. But sooner or later, you're going to have to get up and go out. That's where I'm waiting for you, outside or maybe closer than that, maybe in this room. You think that's a joke, of course. You think this is just a story in a book, and that I don't really mean you. Keep right on thinking so, but be fair. Admit that I'm giving you fair warning. Harley bet me I couldn't do it. He bet me a diamond he'd told me about, a diamond as big as his head. So you see why I've got to kill you, and why I've got to tell you how, and why, and all about it first. This part of the bet, that's part of the bet. It's just the kind of idea Harley would have. I'll tell you about Harley first. He's tall and handsome and suave and cosmopolitan. He looks something like Ronald Colman, only he's taller. He dresses like $1 million, but it wouldn't matter if he didn't. I mean, that he'd look distinguished in overalls. There's a sort of magic about Harley, a mocking magic in the way he looks at you. It makes you think of places and far-off countries and bright music. It was in Springfield, Ohio that I met Justin Dean. Justin was a funny-looking little runt who was just a printer. He worked for the Atlas Printing and Engraving Company. He was a very ordinary little guy, just about as different as possible from Harley. You couldn't pick two men more different. He was only 35, but he was mostly bald already, and he had to wear thick glasses because he'd worn out his eyes doing the fine printing and engraving. He was a good printer and engraver, I'll say that for him. I never asked Harley how he happened to come to Springfield, but the day he got there, after he'd checked in at the Castle Hotel, he stopped in at Atlas to have some calling cards made. It happened that Justin Dean was alone in the shop at the time, and he took Harley's order for the cards. Harley wanted engraved ones, the best. Harley always wanted the best of everything. Harley probably didn't even notice Justin. There was no reason why he should have, but Justin noticed Harley all right, and in him he saw everything that he himself would like to be and never would be, because most of the things Harley has you have to be born with. And Justin made the plates for the cards himself and printed them himself, and he did a wonderful job, something he thought would be worthy of a man like Harley Prentice. That was the name engraved on the cards, just that and nothing else, as all really important people have their cards engraved. He did fine line work on it, freehand cursive style, and used all the skill he had. It wasn't wasted, because the next day when Harley called to get the cards, he held one and stared at it for a while, and then he looked at Justin, seeing him for the first time. He asked, "Who did this?" And little Justin told him, proudly, who had done it. And Harley smiled at him and told him that it was the work of an artist. And he told Justin to have dinner with him that evening after work in the blue room of the Castle Hotel. That's how Harley and Justin got together, but Harley was careful. He waited until he'd known Justin a while before he asked him whether or not he could make plates for $5 and $10 bills. Harley had the contacts. He could market the bills in quantity with men who specialized in passing them, and most importantly, he knew where he could get paper with the silk thread in it, paper that was quite the genuine thing. Oh, that wasn't quite the genuine thing, but was close enough to pass inspection by anyone but an expert. So Justin quit his job at Atlas, and he and Harley went to New York and set up a little printing shop as a blind on Amsterdam Avenue south of Sherman Square, and they worked at the bills. Justin worked harder than he had ever worked in his life, because besides working on the plates for the bills, he helped meet expenses by handling what legitimate printing work came into the shop. He worked day and night for almost a year, making plate after plate, and each one was a little better than the last. And finally, he had plates that Harley said were good enough. That night, they had dinner at the Waldorf Astoria to celebrate and after dinner, they went the rounds of the best nightclubs, and it cost Harley a small fortune, but that didn't matter because they were going to get rich. They drank champagne, and it was the first time Justin ever drank champagne, and he got disgustingly drunk and must have made quite a fool of himself. Harley told him about it afterwards, but Harley wasn't mad at him. He took him back to his room at the hotel and put him to bed. And Justin was pretty sick for a couple of days, but that didn't matter either, because they were going to get rich. Then Justin started printing bills from the plates, and they got rich. After that, Justin didn't have to work so hard either, because he turned down most jobs that came into the print shop. Told them he was behind schedule and couldn't handle any more. He took just a little work to keep up a front, and behind the front, he made $5 and $10 bills, and he and Harley got rich. He got to know other people whom Harley knew. He met Bull Malin, who handled the distribution end. Bull Malin was built like a bull, and that was why they called him that. He had a face that never smiled or changed expression at all, except when he was holding burning matches to the soles of Justin's bare feet. But that wasn't then. That was later, when he wanted Justin to tell him where the plates were. And he got to know Captain John Willies of the police department, who was a friend of Harley's, to whom Harley got quite a bit of the money they made But that didn't matter either because there was plenty left and they all got rich. He met a friend of Harley's who was a big star of the stage and one who owned a big New York newspaper. He got to know other people equally important but in less respectable ways. Harley and Justin knew that a hand oh Harley and Justin knew had a hand in lots of other enterprises beside the little mint on Amsterdam Avenue. Some of the ventures took him out of town, usually over weekends, and the weekend that Harley was murdered. Wait. Oh, and the weekend that Harley was murdered, Justin never found out what really happened, except that Harley went away and didn't come back. Oh, he knew that he was murdered all right because the police found his body with 3 bullet holes in his chest in the most expensive suite, the most expensive suite in the best hotel in Albany. Even for a place to be found dead in, Harley Prentice had chosen the best. All Justin ever knew about it was that a long-distance call came to him at the hotel where he was staying that night and that Harley was murdered. It must have been a matter of minutes, in fact, before the time the newspaper said Harley was killed. It was Harley's voice on the phone, and his voice was debonair and unexcited as ever. But he said, "Justin, get to the shop and get rid of the plates, the paper, everything right away. I'll explain when I see you." He waited only until Justin said, sure, Harley, and then he said, "Attaboy," and hung up. Justin hurried around to the printing shop and got the plates and the paper and a few $1,000s worth of counterfeit bills that were on hand. He made the paper and bills into one bundle and the copper plates into another, smaller one, and he left the shop with no evidence that it had ever been a mint in miniature. He was very careful and very clever in disposing of both bundles. He got rid of the big one first by checking it in at a big hotel. Not one he or Harvey ever stayed at under a false name, just to have a chance to put the big bundle in the incinerator there. It was paper and it would burn, and he made sure there was a fire in the incinerator before he dropped it down the chute. The plates were different. They wouldn't burn, he knew, so he took a trip to Staten Island and back on the ferry, and somewhere out in the middle of the bay, he dropped the bundle over the side into the water. Then, having done what Harley had told him to do, and having done it well and thoroughly, he went back to the hotel, his own hotel, not the one where he had dumped the paper and the bills, and went to sleep. In the morning, he read in the newspaper that Harley had been killed, and he was stunned. It didn't seem possible. He couldn't believe it. It was a joke someone was playing on him. Harley would come back to him. He knew, and he was right. Harley did, but that was later in the swamp. But anyway, Justin had to know, so he took the very next train for Albany. He must have been on the train when the police went into his hotel, and at the hotel they must have learned he'd asked at the desk about trains for Albany because they were waiting for him when he got off the train there. They took him to a station, and they kept him there a long time, days and days, asking him questions. They found out after a while that he couldn't have killed Harley because he'd been in New York City at the time Harley was killed in Albany, but they knew also that he and Harley had been operating the Little Mint, and they thought that might be a lead to who killed Harley. And they were interested in the counterfeiting too, maybe even more than in the murder. They asked Justin Dean questions over and over and over, and he couldn't answer them, so he didn't. They kept him awake for days at a time, ask him questions over and over. Most of all, they wanted to know where the plates were. He wished he could tell them that the plates were safe where nobody could ever get them again, but he couldn't tell them that without admitting that he and Harley had been counterfeiting, so he couldn't tell them. They located the Amsterdam shop, but they didn't find any evidence there, and they really had no evidence to hold Justin on at all. So he didn't know that, and it never occurred to him to get a lawyer. We're gonna have to stop this here, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, that's a good place to stop. We've got a big paragraph coming up, and I don't want to. We only have a few pages left. Yeah, we'll definitely finish this in the next one. Okay, so we've been reading Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous, and specifically we have been reading Don't Look Behind You. Don't Look Behind You by Frederic Brown. Now, if you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, or if you want to join the Discord server, all the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.